So Sharon, before we get to our listener question, we have some great listeners who send in great questions. But before we get to that, given all of this non-information and misinformation and the dialing back of funding, if you could give women your biggest piece of advice that they could hear from our platform here on sort of what they should be doing, what would that piece of advice be?
The one thing I would say to women is this: no one's coming to save you. So if you think that the president or the governor or your state legislator is coming to save you, they're not. But they will if you make them. And see, this is where I said a lot of what we've got to do now, we can't, political environment is what it is, but it's a political issue. It's not a partisan issue because this will affect all women. It doesn't matter, what your political affiliation is. And this is where I think that as 51% of the population and probably 60% of the voting population, that we have an opportunity for this big A advocacy is for women to say, hey, look here, I'm going to talk to my state legislators and say, this is important to me, and you're either going to address this or we will vote you out. And that is really the only power that we have collectively, is to make sure that our voices are heard, and that once people realize that we're serious about this and we're not going to just sit here and take it, I think people will start to listen.
Yeah, and Craig, that piece of advice cannot just be directed to women. This is why I implore the men in the world who have women that they say they care about, daughters that they are raising, that this is their issue too. I mean, for men to sit on their hands over this issue and trade out women's health for a tax break or whatever it is a sad statement about that man's level of value of the women in their lives. And there are a lot of men who have they have big chairs at their tables. There are a lot of women who vote the way their man is going to vote. It happened in this election. So just to direct this at women, unfortunately, we've seen is not enough.
And we are already facing a doctor shortage coming up because we're getting older. We're watching this, we're the last of the baby boomers, but there's a huge push, the people that are going to need the most care, and we don't have enough doctors to meet that need. And so we've got to figure that out and figure out even more, I'd say more innovative ways to deliver care. Just like in the old days where you would get sick and you call the doctor and he would come to your house. Okay, when they stop doing that, you're never going to go back and do that again.
Right.
Well, we need a real serious innovation change in how care is delivered right now, because we don't have enough doctors to backfill. And to be a little bit more, to take it even further, when people are saying, yeah, well, we need more culturally sensitive doctors, and we do. But here's the problem. How are you going to get them if you're decimating public schools? Where are these doctors going to come from?
And diversity programs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How is that going to happen?
Sure.
So you've got to figure out a way. That's why I said all of it's politics, and it's politics and making decisions at the local level, at the state level, for making sure that people are in a position, because people like you and me and Michelle, who, went to Ivy League colleges from public schools, that's a rarity.
Non-existent anymore.
That's a rarity.
Yeah.
Well, I know I said I'll get to the question. This has just been a terrific and enlightening discussion. But we have a question from Lisa from Chicago. And let's give a listen.
Hey, this is Lisa from Chicago. I'm moving up in my career and doing really well. And I don't want to slow down, but I also want to have a family in the near future. So I'm wondering, What age should women start freezing their eggs if they're not ready to become pregnant? What health tips and checkups can both partners do to ensure they're ready to conceive? This is a topic my husband and I are having, and I'm also hearing more about it from friends. Thanks.
Now, this is a question that we are getting around our kitchen table from the next, because we're in that generation. Our daughters are in that stage in life where, it's
both of us.
Yeah, all of us, where they're deciding between pursuing a career, how long do they have to wait, finding a mate. All of those questions feel more existential. But even given that, I met a young woman that's a part of our world who just froze her eggs, and she's in her 30s and very enlightened, very educated. She just did it, but she said she only did it because she heard other people doing it. She had never heard in all of her enlightened years on this planet about the importance of freezing eggs, that it was even a possibility that she could or even should freeze her eggs. So that in today's young women, she said she had never been in a conversation about the importance or the possibility of freezing her eggs. 30-something, early 30s.
That's very interesting, because to give you an idea of how much has sort of become part of the conversation, and that a lot of the tech companies, in an effort to retain female employees and talent, they're offering egg freezing as a benefit because, we don't want you to, we want you to have this and we want to make sure that you're here. So that will allow you to work longer and do whatever, because now you've got this in the bank. But there are two issues that I really want to distinguish between. One is egg freezing and the other is embryo freezing. So say, for instance, if you do IVF, now we have a lot of experience with IVF and, a lot of success with IVF. We are not as far along with egg freezing, because egg freezing wasn't a thing until maybe, I want to say 15 years ago, that it even was a possibility. Okay. So even though we could freeze sperm forever and we could, freeze embryos, we just sort of got into the technology to be able to freeze eggs.
And just so that we're not assuming things, the difference between egg freezing and embryo freezing is...
Okay, so embryo freezing is just a regular IVF procedure. If you were doing IVF and you took medications and you had 8 eggs, they would fertilize them all. And you don't want all 8 at once. So you would take 2 or 3 out, freeze the rest so you could come back if that didn't work. That's what embryo freezing is. And that we know is pretty successful. The world of egg freezing is, as I said, relatively new. And to give you an idea, because it's technologically more difficult to freeze an egg than it is to freeze an embryo, believe it or not.
Okay.
It is.
I did not know that.
Because because a certain number of them, you have to freeze them and then you got to unthaw them before you fertilize them. So if you already had a partner, I would tell any young woman who is like saying, you know what, my husband or my partner and I are planning to have a baby, but not right now. And I'm 34 years old, maybe 3 years from now, because here's the part that I really talk a lot about in my book, in Grown Woman Talk, as we talk about perimenopause and all this. One of the things that we don't talk enough about during perimenopause, which is that period between about 35 and 45 for most women, one of the first things that changes is your fertility. You're not as fertile at 40 as you were at 30. And so that's how a lot of women will come to this as they start to realize, oh my goodness, I can't get pregnant. And that is just because aging of the eggs and
the drop off is huge and sudden, right?
It is. But you don't know, for each individual woman, you don't know how long, I say you're stamped with an expiration date, and you don't know when your eggs are going to expire. For some people, it may be 42. I was born when my mother was almost 45 years old. Now, I'm sure she was not
Well, you were
entirely
the last
pleased
of
about
how
that
many?
situation.
You were the last of how many, though?
8.
And
but then she hadn't had a baby since, in 8 years before I was born.
Oh, I got you.
So you know what I mean?
Surprise,
So she had
Sharon's
been,
here.
right. Oh, I thought it was menopause. And guess what? It's you. So I say that to say that that's the natural progression of women's fertility. So here's the question. Well, if you're a young person and you don't have a partner identified, or you don't have a heterosexual partner,
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do in terms of when am I going to decide to freeze my eggs? Well, the younger you are when you freeze them, the better outcome you have, because you'll get more eggs,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get a bigger harvest. But here's the problem. The younger you are when you freeze them, the less likely you are to come back for them. Because if you froze your eggs at 30 and you decided to get pregnant at 34 because you found the love of your life or you've made that decision, I would still tell you at 34, well, go get pregnant. I wouldn't unfreeze your eggs.
Mm-hmm.
I'd only unfreeze your eggs if you had tried on your own
that
and
makes
you didn't
sense.
get pregnant.
I get it. Yeah,
Right?
that makes
But
sense.
that's why the research is so
Exactly.
unclear about the viability of frozen eggs.
So even though we've been doing it for 15 years, the reality is the number of people who have actually come back for those eggs is, depending upon who you read, anywhere from 6 to maybe 10% of them people have even come back. So it's not like everybody, because a lot of people will get pregnant first.
Yeah.
That's why trying to tell someone, I would never tell a 25-year-old to freeze her eggs.